With me now to talk a bit more about what goes into preparing for a debate like the one about to take place are three people who have helped the leaders, past leaders in different capacities, do just that. Dimitri Soudis is the former Director of Communications to Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Carl Bélanger is the President of Traction Strategies and former Interim NDP National Director. And Geneviève Tomney is the Principal at GT & Co. Hi, everybody. Great to see you tonight. Thank you very much for making the time. Geneviève, you most recently, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think helped prepare Bonnie Crombie for the debate that took place at the during the provincial election. I know that for a lot of Canadians, it's just tonight. For leaders, how much preparation, like how long do leaders often spend getting ready for an event like this?
Yeah, I mean, as much as possible. And provincially, we were in the same situation with our candidate who had, similar to Mark Carney, never done this on the big stage before, right? So you're trying to squeeze in as much as possible. Of course, with the snap election, those timelines get really jammed. So, you know, it kind of starts off as this conversation around how do you want to show up on that stage? Who are you going to be? And I think we saw that really clearly, or at least a dress rehearsal of it in the French debate last night. Because once you can establish what that persona is and who you're going to be, it makes it so much easier to figure out how you're going to navigate the ebb and flow of a debate and how you're going to handle those attacks. But the bottom line is this is the big show. This can be a turning point. It can be a turning point in election campaigns if you play it right. So it's a heck of a lot of work that goes into it.
Carl, what do people who are preparing the candidates do to try and keep the nerves at bay, particularly for people like Geneviève mentioned, who may not have been at this level or in this arena before?
Well, the one thing when you do debate prep is that you make sure that if you're standing in for somebody, that you don't actually win that debate. You need to let the leader build some confidence because that's what it's about, right? You need to be able to help them get into the zone. So you try some lines, you know, you try some attacks, imagining what the opponents would do, but you want to give them a chance to feel confident with the material so that when they show up, they're not more nervous than they would be. So it's all about getting into the zone and people being aware of what their message is and who they're talking to, because, you know, you're not talking to the moderator, you're not talking to a panel of journalists, and, you know, you're barely talking to the other leaders. What you're really doing is talking to the voters that you're trying to attract.
And so how much of a balancing act, Dimitri, is that, particularly in preparation? Like, you know, thinking about how you're going to take on your opponent and the degree to which you need to, if you think about this election in particular, looking at Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Carney, versus how much you're going to use this opportunity to speak directly to Canadians?
Well, first of all, every candidate is unique, so you have to adapt your debate strategy based on that candidate's strengths and weaknesses. And secondly, you have to read the room. You have to read the mood of the country in order to develop your strategy for the debate. So months go into debate prep. And what I mean by that is there's these debate binders, which I'm sure my two other colleagues have seen before and have worked on. So there's debate binders on your policies. There's debate binders on your opponent's policies. And then you have a debate binder on how you're going to, quote unquote, attack your opponent. At the same time, you usually spend 2 to 3 days of debate prep, a couple of days prior to the actual debate happening. There's people who are pretending to be, so in this case, for the Conservative leaders' debate prep, there's people that stood in, and, you know, Carl made a good point there. You don't want to destabilize the candidate you're preparing by out-debating him. The key thing of debate prep, in my view, and that's how we did it with Prime Minister Harper at the time, is it's a different team that focuses solely on debate prep, and then the 2 or 3 closest advisors, so it was myself, Karen Stewart-Olsen, and a few others, that would then take a role in observing how debate prep is taking place. The key thing is moments before the debate starts is there's usually 1 or 2 of the leader's closest advisors with him, and a taboo. Never give any advice that is different from what debate prep was all about, because you're going to destabilize your candidate.
Geneviève, I've always wanted to ask, like, I imagine that each of the candidates has to be prepared for the kinds of attacks that are, like, you know, what vulnerabilities they face. How honest are people around them about, like, what their vulnerabilities are?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think it is, you know, we're not talking about women in tonight's debate, but I think it is unique in my experience having prepared 2 women for debates too, because I think that the attacks come and they hit a little bit differently, and you've really got to get your candidate prepared for that. So what I found was in choosing the folks who were going to play the other candidates, the other roles in that debate prep, it was really important to get people who were going to be as authentic as possible, the people who were going to be able to get under your candidate's skin in exactly the way that you would expect the real person, the real live opponent to be able to do that. Because if you can't properly set them up and prepare them for that emotional feeling, that reaction that they're going to get on the stage in that room when somebody presses just the right button, then they're going to be in trouble.
Can you do that? Or is there like a certain amount, Carl, of like stuff you can't teach that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's things that you can change, but you need to do the best you can to make sure that your leader is not blindsided. And the flip side of that is that you're trying to give him tools to blindside his opponents. And that's why, you know, you have those zingers, those one-liners, the research bits, things that they're not expecting to see that might destabilize them for the rest of the debate. So you're scoring a point, and then they may perform, you know, not as good for the rest of the debate, which could turn to your advantage. But the key thing is, you know, you know, as it was said on the previous panel, you can't over prep them. You can't over prepare them. You can't imagine everything, because if there's too much in their heads, then they will forget what the key messages are. And that's really what this is all about.
I see both your colleagues nodding. Dimitri, last 30 seconds goes to you. You can't over prepare them. You think that's accurate?
It is, because there also needs to be a natural flow to the conversation that they're going to have tonight. And oftentimes, you know, that you had a choice, sir, between Brian Mulroney and John Turner. I actually asked Prime Minister Mulroney, was that pre-scripted? And the answer he gave me was no. Certain things happen naturally, and that's really when the knockout punch truly lands. The last thing I will say, Vashi, is last night we saw a French debate, for those of us who watched the French debate, where leaders were more docile with each other. I think Mr. Poilievre even invited the other 3 leaders out for dinner, because one of the questions was about if they eat American food or not. Tonight, you're going to see a more aggressive approach, both from Mr. Carney and Mr. Poilievre. The way that the Liberals put it to me, for example, was yesterday, Mr. Carney was playing the goalkeeper of a hockey team. Today, he's going to be a forward.
Interesting. We'll see very shortly. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate the discussion. Genevieve Tomney, Carl Belanger, and Dimitri Soudis.